Thank you for tuning in to another What the Future podcast. I just got done recording a podcast with my good buddy Chris Brandt and our special guest Suresh Vasudevan. You might remember Suresh from his days at NetApp. He was a rock star there and then went on to be a CEO of Nimble, went IPO and sold to HPE. Later, he became the CEO of Sysdig, and ultimately he's now at Clockwork, where he is also CEO. If you know Suresh, you know him to be incredibly brilliant and talented and very well respected as a leader, but he's also a really good dude as well. We talked about things like leadership and culture, and then, of course, we led into what Clockwork does, which really solves a lot of problems in AI infrastructure. I learned a lot. I didn't realize some of the complexities that went into building out these environments. But it was really, really cool. Hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thanks for tuning in.
We got to change the game.
On the subject of people, so you are seen as a great people leader. And I remember those days at NetApp when I first met you there, and you were just promoted. You became CEO of Nimble, CEO of Sysdig. You've had an amazing career. But what I really appreciate is, as every time I've met you and been with you, it's always been such a pleasure, easy conversation, and like it feels like you care, you know. And I think that was a lot of the NetApp kind of culture, right?
For sure.
No one cares what you know until they know that you care. So I'm curious, how would you describe your leadership style, balancing people, but also the rigor and to be tenacious in this market?
Well, and I think you got the passion too, which is a really big part of it as well.
No, I appreciate that, Chris. I think I'll start by saying something, Sandesh. Honestly, I feel like NetApp was basically a 10-year school I went to. I learned so much at NetApp that even sort of dimensions on how to lead companies or organizations or teams, I feel like I learned a lot from mentors like Dan and Tom at NetApp. And so NetApp, I credit a lot for sort of over the years how I've at least been leading organizations and teams. And I think there are a few simple principles. I do think the starting point for me is almost a belief that the team actually can accomplish a lot more than any talented individual. And so to harness the power of the entire team, you have to essentially set great context. So real transparency in communication, make sure that so I typically do 50 to 60 one-on-ones in my last company, Sysdig, where we had an employee base of 600 every month, sort of 50 to 60 one-on-ones. And so try and talk to as many people, establish context, and have a very free sharing of information so that there's great transparency in the entire culture. That's the first thing that I would say is extremely important. And ultimately, the goal is a deep belief that a group of individuals that may be individually not as smart as one particular talented individual will always do more if they can work sort of with really good shared context. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I think is a clear sense of purpose. I feel like organizations need to know they're working towards something. And frankly, in tech companies, that sense of where you're heading has to come from a technically grounded perspective of what is the vision that we're working towards? When we succeed, what will the future look like? So let's paint a picture of the future. And in a tech company, that picture of the future has to stem from almost an understanding of where the technology will go, how we can intercept it, and then getting people excited around it. And so that's the second thing I would say is just imbuing the entire organization with here's what our destination looks like and why that's a good place to go is probably the second thing that I would say is key. And then I would say one other thing is, culture really matters, right? And so what I mean by that is these are about where you go, sharing of information is how you operate. But also what is valued in the company at Sysdig, we had a principle, at Nimble, we had a principle which was basically no jerks, right? And so it doesn't matter how smart you are, if you're not fun to work with, then you're probably not going to make for a great team member. And so the culture matters, and it's things around how people are rewarded, what is sort of lauded in the company versus what's frowned upon in the company. And so essentially what you encourage as behaviors within your team, within the larger organization, and is that creating a collaborative environment? So that's probably the third thing I would say. And that, Sandesh, you know this, I absolutely saw that very much at NetApp, and that's something that stuck with me.
You know, when you mentioned sort of the vision part, because I totally agree with you on all these things. And I think what I see leaders struggle the most with, I think, is communicating an effective vision
Right.
and sticking to it, you know, because
Right.
in a lot of organizations, the lack of vision, because if you have the vision, everybody marches towards it. And
Right.
that's, you don't have to tell people to do stuff. They just kind of know where they're going.
That's right.
That's the best way to do it.
That's
But
right.
like, what are the tricks to like really communicating that vision? I mean, I guess one of them is have a good vision to start with, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things that I would say, because I think having a vision that is the clearer it is in your head, the more I think you should be able to translate that to multiple layers of the organization. The same vision when you're talking to the finance team and how you're communicating it, or when you're talking to a business decision maker on the customer side and how you're communicating it, is very different from sitting down in a room full of engineers and architects and how you're communicating it. And so I think, and I believe the ability to translate up and down certainly comes from having good communication skills, but it also comes from clarity around the vision itself. So I think that's the first thing I would say is when you have a vision, find ways of communicating it, even if it takes explicit work to do so at various levels. A one-pager all the way down to a deeply technical document that describes the architecture of where you want to go has to be very, very, that has to exist in the organization.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say is...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please go on.
No. Second thing, please.
Yeah, the second thing I would say is so much of our energy is spent on how do we communicate that externally, whether it's in our first call decks, whether that's in our website messaging, etc. I think more of the battle is really in synthesizing it internally to employees and making sure they are bought. So find forums, right? Whether it's written forums, all hands meetings, team meetings, etc. And actually, this is something I did not do really well, and I continue to sort of struggle at this. Is you feel like sort of if you've communicated it 5 times, you've done enough, or if you've done it 10 times, you've done enough. And I find, gosh, there's no amount of repetition. Find different flavors of saying it. Don't say the same way each time, but you have to keep coming back at it. Every new product, let's go back to our vision and why this new product fits. Every new customer that we want, let's go back and talk about why did this customer become a customer, because they bought into our vision and here's how it fits in. So I feel like that's something that you have to do also, consistently articulate what your vision is in a way that sort of you don't feel like you've done it if you've done it a few times.
Yeah. You're so spot on. The third point that you made about culture, for Chris and I, that like hits right in our heart,
Indeed.
Because we're
Indeed.
it is we were spoiled at NetApp, right?
I could not agree more. I joined NetApp from another company, McKinsey, the consulting firm. And just the honest truth is there's been so many scandals around McKinsey lately that sometimes it's hard to remember. But when I joined McKinsey, it was I think there was a book comparing it to the Jesuit priests or something, because they were so sort of evangelical about what their mission was and so on. I was very proud of the organization, and I still am, notwithstanding sort of the noise around McKinsey. But part of what I was going to say is another place where the entire product was people and the expertise of the firm, right? There was no technology they were building. And so they had to, it's a different style of culture. NetApp's culture was beautiful in its participative nature, et cetera. McKinsey's culture was all about sort of fostering talent at the expense of everything else, right? So sort of how do you take this brightest minds and motivate them and sort of keep making sure that the organization maintains a high bar on talent? But what is common to both of these is ultimately how do you take whatever it is that you believe in and make that percolate through the entire organization? Whatever your culture is, how do you reinforce that and make sure every person's living that? So it's almost that's what NetApp did so well, is sort of it was a strong culture, but how did every employee, whether it was the 100th employee or the 1,000th employee, seem to embody that culture? I think they did that really well.
And the other thing that helps culture is when you have a very successful sales organization, from sales teams, architects, and anyone supporting the sales team.
Yeah.
If they feel they're winning, if they're coming into work every day, they believe in the vision, they're excited about what they're doing, they feel like people have their back, they have good leadership, guiding them. Those kinds of qualities is why people stay at companies. I firmly believe a lot of people don't stay at these companies because of money. They stay there because of other factors.
Indeed.
I know for me, that's definitely the case, is the people.
No, for sure. Practices like Tom calling not just salespeople who close deals, but engineers that help close deals and support people that help support the customers that ultimately did expansions. Those allow everyone to focus on success, rewards everybody, right? And so I agree.
Yeah. I got to tell you this quick story and then we'll get started here on the Tom Mendoza topic. So a really good family friend of ours, my wife's best friend's daughter, they live in our neighborhood here. And she got into Notre Dame, and her.
You know what? Before you go there, you should explain who Tom Mendoza is.
Oh, I think
not everybody who's listening is going to know who Tom Mendoza is.
I think our audience definitely does. But Tom Mendoza was, when I started in '98 at NetApp, he was the director of sales and marketing. He then became president and vice chairman, and now he's on a bunch of boards. And he's also
the Mendoza School of Business.
The Mendoza School of Business. And just that story when he tells you about how that all happened, it's just so awesome.
Indeed. And Tom and Dan were sort of great partners in shaping that entire company's evolution.
Yeah, totally.
For sure.
So our family friend's daughter is going to Notre Dame. It's a freshman year. She's a little, just like anybody would be, a little nervous. And I just reached out to Tom and I just said on LinkedIn, hey, she's going to Notre Dame, as a freshman. She's super excited. She's, wonderful person, wonderful family. Dad went to the Mendoza School of Business too. Would you mind just sending her a note? He's like, send me both of their phone numbers. And he created a video for each of them and sent it to me.
Gosh.
So
he
Tom
is just
Mendoza.
amazing that way. That is, he makes time for these things. That's what is amazing.
So important. Important, especially these days in the world of work from home and, social distancing and distractions of these phones and devices. I'm very, very, very big on the humanity side. That's why our three pillars are enterprise and AI, tech sales, and humanity. Because, we can't forget, that's why, we're all humans.
Agreed.
First.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, let's dive in a little bit. So, Suresh, for people that might not know you, can you just tell us a little bit of history of, your from, your young ages to kind of what brought you? Yeah, what brought you here? How'd you get to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in India, did my engineering undergrad and business school in India. And then I joined McKinsey, the consulting firm, in the early 90s. And towards the late 90s, I transferred to the US, to Chicago in particular, with McKinsey, with the intention of going back after about a year of a short-term stint. But that's when a friend of mine had joined NetApp, and when I visited him, it became clear to me that the excitement of the late 90s, this was 98, the excitement of the Valley was just completely impossible to ignore and get drawn to. And so I left McKinsey to join NetApp, and I almost spent 10 years at NetApp. That was really in many ways the beginning of my tech career and tech education. And I joined as an individual contributor, managing one of our alliances with Dell at the time, moved gradually into product management and then onto the exec team, to run engineering and product management. And so that was one of my that fun 10 years stints where I learned an enormous amount. The last 2 years were interesting in that while I was running R&D and product management, I had just come off of a year and a half of running a business unit that we had acquired, a company we'd acquired. That was my first virtual CEO experience because there's a security company called Dicrew that NetApp we decided to structure it as an independent business because it was partnered with EMC and other storage companies. And to give it a chance to survive, we needed to think of it as an independent sub with its own sales, own marketing. That never panned out when EMC acquired RSA. The idea of an independent security subsidiary that would partner with EMC did not make any more sense. And so we merged it back, but the 1.5 years of running a full business sort of unfortunately spoiled me in the sense that I did not want to go back into a functional role after that. I loved the idea of running an entire organization and the business, not just the product. And so that's when I left. And since then, I've just been doing startups. Chris and Sandesh, I was at, my first startup was a company called Omnion. Also an interesting experience. This was when I joined, they had an S1 on file. Dumbest timing-wise, dumbest time to have left NetApp to join because it was 2008 towards the end. So when I joined, the revenue was something like 37 million. When I signed the offer, 8 weeks later, when I joined, it was about 23 million. And so really the bottom had fallen out of the market. We had to pull the S1. We had to restructure the business. But ultimately, we were acquired and it had a successful exit. And then I think began what I think of as probably my most fun CEO startup experience, maybe organizational experience. I joined Nimble. We were about 20, Nimble Storage. We were about 25 people or thereabouts when I joined, just had launched the product. I'd been on the board for a year prior to joining as CEO. And so it was really pre-revenue. And over the course of the next 6-7 years, the company became a public company and then went on to be acquired by HPE. Just about a month ago, I had the entire Nimble team at my home for dinner. So it's more than sort of the milestones that are business milestones. I remember it was another place where the culture felt exactly like the NetApp culture. Almost everyone I meet from there talks fondly about their time at Nimble.
For sure.
I then left, took a year off and wanted to do something completely different from hardware and infrastructure, which is ironic considering where I came back to, but went to a company called Sysdig, partly enamored by the idea that Kubernetes was going to become the basis by which cloud applications were built. Sysdig was really an observability and security company for containerized microservices. Again, joined pretty early. So I think we were about 80 people when I joined, just under 5 million in ARR. I left about 6 years in. We're now, Sysdig is now about 120 million, 600 people, successful, very strong in container security, an open source pioneer in sort of cloud native container security. But for a couple of reasons, mostly to do with AI, I decided it was time to leave Sysdig. So just the last part of my journey and arriving at Clockwork. For the last year or so when I was at Sysdig, we had already started to embrace AI to try and bring agentic security to bear within the Sysdig platform. And I'm seeing firsthand how transformative AI can be when used well. I also realized as an existing company that has existing customers, a pre-existing architecture that you've built on, you can do a lot to embed AI, and Sysdig is doing that really successfully. But two things struck me. One, the next decade and a half, every product is going to be designed ground up with AI in mind rather than embedding AI. And the second thing that fascinated me was, as much as you can think about companies that use AI, I was fascinated by the underlying infrastructure and the underlying models, the underlying actually foundational layer itself that was then feeding these companies that were using AI. And so I decided I was actually going to retire after Sysdig or do something a little less intense after 17 years of startups. But the draw of AI was so strong, I wanted to go back to doing something in the AI space and ideally a startup, which is always sort of my preference. And so that's how I came to Clockwork.